Recently picked up a used guitar, a used Stratocaster, more like a parts caster, from someone local, and got to know him pretty well. And I mentioned to him that I do some guitar repair, and he brought this out of his house, and I said, yeah, I'll be happy to take a look. Looks like we have some minor damage, broken headstock to this Ibanez. This model is the PF5CEM-S1202. So what we're going to do is, in this video, we're going to show how this previously repaired headstock, using what looks to be Gorilla Glue that didn't hold with either another fall or bump, and we're going to re-glue this, but in a way that it should be nearly as strong as if it had never been broken before. And we'll go through some of those details. After that, we'll probably clean up the fretboard and re-level his frets, because we do see some lines or divots in it, and we'll flatten them and recrown them, retruss them, and go from there. See if there's anything else the matter with the guitar, and I'll be happy to return it to him and see if it works and see if he's happy. So let's jump into it. Alright, so let's have a closer look. We can see that there is remnants of the Gorilla Glue. The reason I know this is Gorilla Glue is I've used it quite a bit. And Gorilla Glue is a polyurethane based glue, and what it does is it expands, sort of like a sponge when it's dry and you wet it, and it sort of expands out. You can tell that's what it's done. It kind of has a foamy look to it. Not the best for gluing wood to wood, especially in an application like this where the headstock is under, many pounds of pressure when fully stringed, especially depending on the gauge of the strings you use. So we'll be scraping away what's left of the Gorilla Glue. We want to make sure there is zero glue on the actual wood, so that we get good wood to wood contact. So quite a bit to clean up there. And then I'll also point out there are parts of the previous gluing job that did not break, but they're very small, and I'll likely not take that out and re-glue it, because it's not something that's going to cause weakness from my perspective. And there is a little bit of a larger piece on the headstock itself, and that is right here. So let's get in this. We can see that that definitely left signs of Gorilla Glue on it, but it's really very tight. It's not loose, and I would prefer to take this off and re-glue it, mainly just for consistency, but also for looks. However, this is a very small piece of wood, and most of the surface of this piece of wood is available for gluing. So I'm going to give that a shot, because I don't want to have to remove what's already still glued with the Gorilla Glue and potentially break or crack it more. And of course, if it doesn't seem to work, what we'll do is we'll go back and redo that piece, but I don't think we'll need to do that. I don't think we're going to need to use any additional wooden spleens, which we'll see a lot of times, depending on the guitar and the break. We'll go in and we'll actually route out a spleen of mahogany, usually mahogany, something very strong. One up the middle, one on the side of each, sometimes an entire block. Lots of luthiers get very creative with that. I'm not a luthier. I'm just someone who loves doing this and have been learning a lot. So I've done repairs like this before. This isn't my first one. And I know by experience, Gorilla Glue is not the best method. What we're going to be using today is Tight Pond. Okay, so I do have some glues up here. This is the typical glue that we use, which is a regular Type Bond. There's also this Type Bond 3. Now, I said we're going to be using that one. This one is mainly meant for being fully waterproof, which obviously is not necessary for this guitar. It's a bit stronger than this glue, although not rated at massive amounts of pounds of pressure more, but certainly enough to warrant using it over this for a headstock. I have used this for other headstocks and it works perfectly fine. There's really no concern with it, but since I have the Type 3 that's a bit stronger. So first thing we'll do, we'll get started with brushing. What I'm going to use is the wire brush to go across the grains, alongside the grain on both sides, getting all that glue out. I'll probably chip away, scrape away the big chunks if they don't come off with the scraper. Once I'm confident with the surface, we'll do a generous portion of glue here, and then as well as here when we put them together. We're going to have a lot of squeeze out, which is exactly what we want. We'll clean that up, but that's a sign of you've got enough glue. We want to keep the grain structure, you know, the peaks and valleys of where it broke, so we get a nice fit. I don't want to take any real wood off. I'm just trying to clean the surface, any dirt, and then of course the previous glue. And it looks like I'm going to have to chip some of this glue off. Let's look at this one now. Okay, so now I'm going to chip this glue off. I'll use a small chisel. Let's go carefully. Just trying to take off the pieces I know I can tell are glue. You can actually tell because it looks, I don't know how it's showing up on the camera here, but it looks like almost like foam, right? It's pretty obvious where the glue is and where the wood is. We just don't want any of that left over. So we get the tightest bond we can with the new glue, the new correct glue. All right, let's keep going, and I'll probably time lapse this because it is quite boring. We'll get to the fun stuff. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Don't worry about these scratches here. We're going to buff all that out. Okay, now let's move to the actual headstock. See how that goes. See how that looks like foam? That glue. Okay, it's time to glue this headstock on. After further analysis off camera, I think I'm going to have to put a couple of dowel pins through this from the back, because when I look at this angle where most of the wood was retained on the headstock, I'm going to feel a little better about putting dowels in that. So if this were a higher end guitar, not putting down this guitar, but just it's not a very expensive guitar, it's a decent guitar, I wouldn't do that. We would do splicing and you know, let's call it a deeper, more involved job. So what we'll do is we'll prepare this to do a glue using the Type Bond that I mentioned earlier, and then we'll do a version of wrapping with medical grade tubing to get a uniform pressure on the glue that we use, and then we'll probably do some clamps as well. So this is a little tricky. We're also going to have some touch up, because you can see that once this thing is glued, we're going to have a fair bit of wood still exposed, because the top layer has broken off and it's not present. So if it were elsewhere, I'd glue that with it, but we'll fill that in. I'm going to use some water just to dampen the wood. Nothing crazy. And we'll wipe that down a bit. We don't need it soaking wet, just wet enough. It's going to really help with the gluing. Let's turn this over. Do the same. Not everyone does this, the water or dampening first, but I've seen the difference between doing it and not doing it depending on the type of break you're fixing. You certainly wouldn't do it with small cracks that you're fixing, but something this big and important with that much pressure, you want to just maximize the power of the glue and its effect. So just going to do everything we can. Let's make sure we're dust free. That's good. And then we'll start to glue, and I'll use a paintbrush to get it down into the grooves. Make sure we've got glue on this piece as well as this piece. You don't want to overdo it, but you certainly don't want to underdo it. All right, so let me get a brush here. Let's use a cheap little brush. I'll clean afterward. You can use your finger for this, but I like the brush because it's just going to confirm with all those tiny bristles and get down into the grooves of this grain. Dab down on it, just make sure it's covering it. That's good. Now let's do the headstock. Do a little more, just a dab. Okay. Now, the tricky part. I'd like to use this wrap. If you don't have a tube like this, I think they do call it medical grade. It doesn't have to be medical grade, but any kind of tubing that allows you to do a wrap over a neck bind. People love using this for gluing on a fretboard, for example, because you can go across the entire fretboard uniformly and it just gives a very even pressure throughout. This is a very small area of the break, so this tubing is a bit much, so I'll have to hold it in place with a couple of clamps and some tubing, and we'll see how that goes. So to get it started, I'll need a clamp or two. Let's reach over here. Any kind of clamp will do. Don't want it to be too far and away. Now, usually when you're doing a neck, obviously the grain is going this way, and you kind of want to slide it in to where the break is versus just coming down. Coming down could take any parts and push where you're not getting in the grooves of the grain and so forth. So I recommend kind of starting a little further back. Obviously this neck's at an angle, so you can sort of see it like this, and then start back here and just sort of work your way. You can feel it kind of coming together where it's true. Yeah, that's exactly where it needs to be. Okay, and you'll see the squeeze out. So I'm just going to do one clamp right here to hold it in place where my thumb is keeping that pressure. So that's good. Let's get this squeeze out off there. The nice thing about True Bond is even if this stuff dries on your guitar, you just get a wet rag afterward and maybe even heat it up, warm water, and this stuff will come right off. It's water based, so it comes off very easy. It's not going to harm your finish or anything like that. It's very different than something like a crazy glue or a poly glue. And we're going to get more squeeze out as we do the wrap as well. But for now, this is just getting some of the main amount. Let's flip this over. Lots of squeeze out here. Okay. Be a little tricky to get this going, so let's be careful with how we start this and kind of where we end it. But once I get it wrapped to a point, I'll probably move this clamp around and release it once I get a decent enough wrap, I should say. But I need to be careful here. So let's start back here just to get the wrap going. Probably should have a thinner tube. This is pretty thick, but it's not gonna matter at the end. It's a little harder to deal with because it's such a small glued area. All right, so I've got that started. Notice I'm not pulling super tight. Just want to get it started where it's not going to pull apart. So I've done that, we're good there. And then I'll work my way up towards where the clamp is. Holding it with my thumb when I pull the tube tight. Just holding that piece with my thumb. And now we're coming right up onto the glued area. Because of the angle of this break, you know, it's tough because we're real close to the tuners, and I do need to get to this section, so I don't want to release this prior to the pressure, enough pressure being placed over the whole amount. So let's see how this works. I haven't necessarily come into this situation before. All right. I think we're okay. Let's release that. Yeah, that works. Okay. Holding the pressure on the tube. I see some more squeeze out down here. You may not see it, but I do. Not a big deal if I get it later. All right. I'm going to come up here. Yeah, we want to... I was thinking I'd come up here to bring it down, but that's going to draw it back. So let's not do that. Let's just keep working our way up. I think this is going to be where we stop. Now I'm going to go back down. Pressure going back down isn't all that important because we've got the pressure already applied. Just getting the tubing worked out of the way. So let's move that off. Let's move that down and just sort of tie it just so it doesn't start to unravel. Oh, it did, just like that. It started to unravel. A little bit overkill here on the tubing, right? You don't normally need to wrap 2 times over. I'm only doing it because of the length of the tube, and I kind of don't want it hanging all over the place. You kind of get my drift. The main portion of clamping that the tube was doing was done the first time through, so we're good to go there. Okay, so that's done. Now let's take a look at our work. Now it's hard to see, it's actually impossible to see what our angle is currently, but it should be perfectly spot on. So if I spot on as far as the angle of the glue and its perfect break area, if I kind of squeeze here, I want to see if I have much give. Yeah, that is super tight. Now, just to be safe, one more step I'm going to take. Again, a bit overkill, but a little better if we do a couple of clamps on top of that, on top of the tubing, but at the angle here versus here, because remember the break really starts right about where the angle of the headstock is starting to curve. I think this is around something like 15 or 30 degrees, who knows, but I'm going to crimp it right around here. I'm going to make sure that I don't see this neck headstock move in any way, because I don't want to have the reverse effect of clamping it. I said crimp earlier, but clamping it to the point where it's creating pressure outside of where the break is that causes the headstock to do this. We don't want this headstock to move because it's in perfect position right now, and I just want to give it a little more pressure. So let's just see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think this was necessary. Most of the time when you see a wrap in place of a clamp, you're not seeing clamps over the wrap. I'm just going that extra step because I can't see underneath all the wrap I did. And I just want to give it, yeah, this is not moving at all. So it's definitely locked into the right place. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this at least 20 hours. The glue will start to set in about 1 to 2 hours. By the 3rd hour, this particular glue, it does take a little longer than the standard type POM, but which is this one, has a lengthier cure time. It is waterproof, not necessary for this, but like I said earlier, a bit of a stronger glue as far as pounds that it can hold. strengthening wise. So we'll go ahead and give this a few hours before I know it's set, and then I'm going to take the clamp off and unravel it just to make sure that an angle didn't go out of place, because it's after a few hours it's good enough that once I unravel it, this headstock's not going to fall off. It's already started to cure. That will just give me extra confidence that the wrapping we've done and the clamping has not shifted that brake off, so this thing is gluing to a wrong angle. I'll do that just to double check it. I'll probably film it, but I'm going to give this at least 24 hours because, like I said, 2 to 3 hours you actually have a good hold. But the glue hasn't fully cured and hardened. It's just, you know, let's say it's 20% there, and that's good enough to hold it. So we'll check that out, come back a little later, and go from there. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. It's been over 24 hours. Let's see how we did. Okay, so let's take a look at our angle. That is flush with the back of the neck. I can feel that this is also flush. And we do not have anything occurring there. Looks flat. Our angle looks perfect there too, so we did good. Let's check the strength, do some bending here. Yep, it's not really flexing, so we have a pretty solid result. Now what I'm going to need to do, what I decided to do, is just to be extra safe, and because this is not a very high-end guitar, it's a decent guitar, but it's not in your $1,000+ range. It's going to probably be around $300 to $400 guitar. I think I'm going to do a couple of extra wooden dowels in the back of the neck to cover this area up into here, probably 2. So I'll drill those, and we'll glue them, and then we'll be able to darken the pins. You won't be able to see. It won't be perfect. None of this is going to look perfect because it's such a bad break and so many pieces are missing. We'll be doing some fit and finish, or finish I should say. We're doing the fitting now, but we'll start to clean this up when everything's said and done. So for now we're going to get ready to drill these. So I'll get some thick dowels. We'll come back and take care of that soon. So let's get to drilling. Okay, I've looked at this and I've determined that we want to put a dowel wood pin right about here. We want the most amount of wood from the back side of the headstock to the front of the headstock where it's thick and not starting to thin, which puts it at about right here. We don't want to go into here because we'll hit the truss rod or be too close to that. So about right here, bringing it up to here, and ending up about right here will cover the most wood, right about here. What I use is I keep these, just a box of these dowel pin sets. The nice thing about it is they give you lots of different sizes. I'm going to use the thickest one for this, just one. I'm not going to do 2 like I said earlier. So these are the same size. So we're going to just use one of these, and you'll see that when we drill a hole, I'll make sure and measure to not go through the other side, because we'll just have to do some touch up for that hole in that dowel pin on the back side, but you won't see anything on the front because we'll come right under this and not drill through. All right, so let's look for a drill bit that's about that in diameter, a little smaller, and then Well, about the same size, and then that'll be good. And then we'll use the same glue for this procedure. Let's get that drill bit and I'll start that process. All right, so I have a drill bit here that's about the same size and diameter. So we'll go ahead and use that. It's better for it to be smaller than larger, because that way I can just drill a little bigger by going around the sides, and then we're going to be able to hammer this in. So we definitely don't want to go larger than the dowel, because that'll be a loose fit, even though the glue would be around it. But better to have as perfect a fit and size as the diameter as possible. So let's get that drilled and we'll go from there. All right, so that's a perfect fit. So we'll glue that, but now that I see we got really good depth there, but it is on the sort of tip end of the brake. It isn't just being held though by this very thin little bit of wood, because as you can see, the brake instantly goes nearly straight down. So it's getting more and more of the headstock wood as the dowel goes deeper. But I'd feel a little better if as we've captured a lot of this wood here, that we capture more of this wood from the headstock in relation to the neck by doing a smaller pin. So I'm probably going to do one more pin. We did get some lacquer that broke off here. Again, this is going to be a fit and finish situation, so we'll try and blend all that in, but I will feel better about doing one more dowel. I keep changing my mind, but that's what happens sometimes. You look at something and you think, oh, that's really what it needs, and then as you get into it, you have to be willing to change your mind with more information. So all good plans, right? So we'll get this glued, but before we do that, I'm going to do one more hole right here in this section, and it's going to be a smaller pin, and that will add strength to the other side, not just this side. So I think the size that we want to use for that is here. This is the smallest. We'll just do one more right there. So the big pin is dowel is going straight. This one I'm going to take at maybe 15 degrees, 20 degrees, and that way we get as much of this coverage as possible. I don't want to be drilling holes all throughout this, because that will weaken everything, right? I mean, you might as well just replace the whole piece of wood. But this would, I think, get us where we really need to be. Probably overdoing it, but you know, this player might go with heavy gauge strings. But either way, you never want your headstock breaking while you're playing, or you don't want to have to do this more than once. This is already the second time, so let's try and make this the last time. All right, let me find a drill bit for this size. Yeah, that should do it. Oh, perfect. So let's come in there. Let's mark this off. Should be right about perfect. All right, well, unfortunately, my drill bit slipped right through. It went from right where I was about to stop and let go and just zipped right through the other side, which is not the end of the world, but it's certainly not what I wanted to do. So now we have to patch this side as well. But again, we'll blend that to be as invisible as possible. But this is good. I mean, this looks horrible. This looks horrible, of course. Not the best work for me, but it's the kind of thing that's not going to really be seen. It's not winning a beauty contest, and it's not a rare instrument, so we wouldn't have done it this way to begin with if it were. But this still will work very well and be very strong, even with the two dowel pins so close together. We're going to be just fine. So that's going to add additional strength to what's already extremely strong. So let's go ahead and get these glued, and then we'll let that sit overnight. Once we press that in, we see we have squeeze out for the big dowel, and this went all the way through with glue as well. Probably move this just a little. Okay, this has been drying for 24 hours. We're good to cut the dowel pins off, and then we'll be able to work on finish and touch up. And we'll do that from this side, and the other side we didn't need because, as we recall, we flattened that one. And I also did some crazy glue off camera just to get down into any potential gaps. And I also did the additional crazy glue in the previous glue section that we left, which is right here. So you'll see that you might see some shininess here, but we ended up placing the crazy glue throughout this section that was glued with Gorilla Glue just to give it a little more strength. And again, that was just a very small section that we didn't re-glue. I believe it was that area. I did it both there and on the back, and went down these lines and on the other side, if you can see that. So we're good on this headstock being firmed up, glued, completed, and now the rest for this job will just be sanding, smoothing, coloring, finishing, blending it all in. But we're good to go on the strength. And we'll clean the rest up with a chisel. We have this flattened. Obviously this will all be sanded and smooth and then touched up, as well as this side. And I'm beginning to wonder as I look at this headstock, I didn't notice before, but it seems to be entirely black. It may be fading into blue. For now, I'd like to start moving to more scraping, sanding, cleaning up these grooves and the dirt and grime on the fretboard. Obviously seeing if I can knock out these big divots in a few of these frets, so need to level this. I'm pretty sure these frets can be saved. I don't think they've been leveled or crowned before, so we're going to give that a shot. But these first few frets are in pretty bad shape. I just think we've got enough left on them that will be okay. So we're going to do that and look elsewhere for any other issues and finish this job up. So we're going to just take off the dirt, grime, buildup, and some of the grooves within the fretboard. This fret's the worst. This one's second. So these are pretty bad. This one and beyond are not too bad. Also looks like someone has glued on this nut. I see crazy glue here. I know I didn't do that. Wonder if that's been off before or if it's the original. We'll find out. I think it's fairly even, so I'm going to leave that on. We'll see how the action is. It also looks like the biggest groove of all the frets, so this is probably where this player's hitting a lot of G's. I mean, look at the difference there. That's even before we clean them and condition them. Okay, we'll now take some steel wool and we're just going to clear off any of the high spots that the razor blade didn't get, really to just smooth out the fretboard. And we'll do that prior to cleaning with a final polish and cleaning and conditioning of the actual fretboard. And then we'll start on leveling the frets and recrowning them. It's important to know that you should never go across the grain because you'll leave scratches in the fretboard. You want to go with the grain. All right, let's get started on leveling these frets. We're going to use a metal square box I have. I've put 320 grit, taped it double-sided tape here. You can use anything for this, wooden blocks, etc. Normally when you're leveling the fretboard without frets in it, you're going to use a radius block, like usually 12 inches is the standard radius. We're not radiusing these frets, we're actually leveling them to take off or take out the indentations in them, as well as to square them off, and then we'll crown them and file them down and polish them. And that's as best we can do without actually replacing these frets. I think there's probably a good 1 or 2 more of these leveling crowning jobs to do before these frets need to be replaced. We'll know when we get the strings back on and test it for buzzing, setup, intonation. We'll find out if this approach is going to work this time, but it's easy enough to do prior to me going through all that setup process and then determining, yeah, we have a dead fret here and there. Because what I'll do in that case is I'll just replace the worst frets as opposed to doing a full fret job. We're going to place the block flat onto the board, and we're going to go over evenly across, back and forth. And what I'll do first, I almost forgot, I'm going to get a marker and mark these frets, and then we'll see as the marker comes off the frets where we're hitting the frets for low and high spots, so that when the marker is fully off the fret, we'll know that that fret's been fully covered, and that'll be across the whole fretboard. So let's give that a shot. I'm going to start moving from the bottom of the fretboard or middle to more of the upper range. This is where our major dents or divots are in the frets. You can see, maybe the camera's showing this, you can see where we're getting the majority of the top of leveling these frets, and we still have a ways to go on these divots, and that's why the marker still shows. So we're getting close. Okay, I'm going to take care of just some of these low spots where the divots are just by a single piece of sandpaper using my finger just to try and get into that, and then I'll go back and level. Alright, I think we're going to stop there, see how this thing feels after we crown it. Let's get started on that. Got my crowning device. This is a diamond surfaced crowning file. Let's get the right. We can see that these frets are pretty rough now, so our next step will be to polish them and get them all smoothed up. And I think we did a good enough job on the dents. I can barely feel, you can see it, but I can really not feel anything when I rub my finger across that fretboard, which is what you want. You don't want those strings grabbing a divot and keep you from moving around. So let's get these cleaned up. I'm going to use some of these StewMac grits. I'm going to start with 400, go to 8, start with 220 just to rough it, go to 400, go to 8, and then I'll finish it with probably 1000, 1200 up to 2000, and then polish it. Here. Okay, it's the wall. Alright, I'm just going to do one last pass with a 2400 grit, which will help do very fine polishing beyond the steel wool. Then I'll do a polish rub compound and get them shiny and sleek. Then we'll move on to the bigger task at hand, which is taking care of all of that ugliness. And then we should be close to done. All right, now we'll prepare for the rub compound. For this, I'm going to tape up the frets just so that doesn't do too much to get into under the wood of the fretboard. We have some slight touching of that very high grit sandpaper onto the fretboard, even though it's against the grain. Won't be a problem because when we do a final cleanup on these, we'll see all that disappear. But all looking very good. Almost done with that. So we good. Okay. So I'm going to use this scratch doctor, but any kind of polish with a bit of grittiness and compound in it will work great. Those are really shiny and smooth now, so will make playing a lot easier. I'm going to suggest to the owner that if the dents or divots that still are slightly in a few of these frets really bother them, that they should consider getting a fret job, which I can do, but didn't want to do it on this round. I want to try this first because fret jobs are timely and they can get expensive. Okay, let's pull the tape off now. Actually, let's do this. Let's go ahead and leave everything on because now I'm going to shift to touching up all of the repair work on the headstock, and this will keep serving as a protector of the fretboard. But those frets are good. Lots of people use various methods. Some have buffing machines, some just do the you know, towel or a type of cloth. Some just stick with, you know, finishing up with steel wool. I went through several different methods, but there's no one way that's right or wrong. Basically, anything that gets these very smooth and shiny. Shiny not being the main point being extremely smooth without any rough sand edges or pieces on it, which the shinier it is, usually the smoother it is too. So that'll help with the playing. All right, let's get started on touching up the headstock repair.